Okay, cool, cool. All right, well, we're here with Whit, lovely, lovely yoga and meditation teacher. Um, yeah, little intro about how we met. I believe was on Denman Island in a retreat in June, but it seemed like it was December and it was raining and it was cold and we were all bundled up. And then he's of course come back a few times to teach at Elements in Powell River. So yeah, let us maybe give you a little 1-2 minutes of your story of teaching, where you're at right now. Give us a little taste of you.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, in terms of teaching, wasn't something that I ever planned on doing. Wasn't the intention when I started studying yoga, and just I guess got more and more interested in it. And yeah, at the time when I started teaching, there was so much opportunity as a male teacher. I just had to walk into a studio and tell them I taught yoga, and I didn't even ask for a job. They just offered me a teaching position because they wanted to balance out the teaching group a little bit more with some male energy. So I had a lot of opportunity, and that kind of just sparked the fire. And yeah, I've been teaching now, I guess, full time for over a decade, and yeah, I've focused really predominantly, especially in the last, I guess, 7 to 8 years, in terms of teaching on traditional vinyasa practices and Buddhist mindfulness and Buddhist meditation. And yeah, spent a lot of time teaching in Victoria, Vancouver, and then started coming over to Europe in 2014 and teaching workshops, and for about a month or 2 months per year. And that evolved to the point where, yeah, I'm talking to you from my home in southern Spain, and all of my workshops on my schedule have been canceled as a result of the current events. But yeah, that's predominantly where I'm teaching, is in Europe, but obviously coming back to Canada every once in a while to teach retreats and teach workshops as well.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Um, well, to dive into what it is that you teach, because you teach longer retreats, up to a week, I believe, and then lots of little workshops. And so what, say some of the Buddhist workshops, when you're diving into the nature of us, of being a human being, can you speak to, what is the mind? In the last workshop you taught us, or the Buddhist mind, was a lot about the nature of the mind and what it grabs onto and what it doesn't want, and its impermanent nature. So give us a little taste of maybe how you experience your own mind, or how us as human beings are kind of wrestling and dancing with this mind of ours.
Yeah, I'll give you my 2 cents. I guess, from not only my study and practice of meditation, but also integrating my background from primatology and animal behavior studies. I think, simply put, the way I have perceived the mind as a result of my conditioning is that it's an incredible piece of survival software. And so, invariably what we're doing in these practices is developing the ability to objectively observe and in turn study and learn from this piece of software that has allowed our species to evolve, for better or for worse, to the place we're at. And so, from my own experience in my own practice and working with others, I think, to use the language I believe you just used, wrestling with the mind. I'm currently, with all the downtime, getting back to working on a book that I started 3-4 years ago, and I'm in the part of the book where I'm writing really about how we've separated ourselves from nature and from our animal biology. And from my perspective, through my own experience, I believe that this is, one of the biggest sources, or perhaps the cause of our suffering, is that we deny this survival mechanism that we inherited from our animal ancestors. And as a result of that denial, it makes it pretty difficult to understand what's going on within the mind and why it's doing what it's doing. But through my own experience, again, both as a result of my studies in primatology and primate research, and primate research on myself, I feel when we can begin to understand the mind from that perspective, that it's a piece of survival software, it begins to make a lot more sense. And this curious paradox that only when we begin to accept ourselves as we really are can we then change. And so for me, the more I'm able to befriend this animal mind, the more it makes sense why it's behaving the way it is, although it's rather antiquated for contemporary society. But from there, I can begin to shift and begin to cultivate the changes to move beyond that biological conditioning.
Right. And in the retreat I did with you, I believe it was on the last day, we practiced Metta, this loving kindness. So from what I hear with you speaking about the mind and this animal nature, and really just how we are in this world, a lot of it is that learning the skills and capability and practicing it of just self-love and self-compassion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think, metta and loving kindness, which is the practice of befriending ourselves and the entirety of our being, is imperative for our development. In the Buddhist tradition, it's often said that mindfulness is great, but it can only take you so far. And without the practice of metta and the ability to befriend those aspects of our embodiment that are unpleasant or perhaps unfavored by the mind, we're not going to get very far. So yeah, I think that's really it, is when the mind is angry, or fearful or jealous. These are emotions that are very, very helpful in terms of survival, and they're just a little bit over exaggerated for the situation in which most contemporary human beings live. But it is it's the demonizing and the aversion towards these mind states and the duality of these are good mind states and these are bad mind states that actually creates the inability to evolve beyond their influence. And so, that those metta practices are really that. Can we have metta? Can we develop loving kindness for the fears, the angers, the jealousies, as well as not just pain in the mind, but pain in the body. These animal instincts to get away from that which is uncomfortable is actually what empowers them and impedes our ability to be free of their influence.
That's a big way that I experience those states. And you mentioned in the body, where it's like that fear sometimes is right in the middle of my solar plex. And I remember being on retreat, and it's like just sitting with my solar plex and kind of dancing with it again. And it's, sometimes it can be overwhelming, and then it just disappears or it shifts, and it's constantly emotion. Fascinating thing to experience. If you could say rewind to when you first started taking these steps into meditation or into the yoga, say the first few years of practice, what were some of the, whether it be some of the big learnings, the kind of the ahas of like, oh, this is how it is, or some of the big challenges that you bumped up against?
Hmm. Well, I think the first and maybe biggest aha moment was, when I first was exposed to both classical yogic philosophy and Buddhist philosophy more or less at the same time. I was living in Australia at the time, and it was the first time in my life that I felt like I wasn't completely alone, that there were others that had the perspective that I was walking around with for much of my life. So that was a hugely inspiring moment, because I felt very, up until that point, very lost and very separated from the world, and when I came across these philosophies, they just really resonated on a deep level, and from there I just became enthralled with them, and started devouring books upon books. And yeah, in terms of the practice and challenges, I think for me, coming from a background in sport, athletics, as well as my German Austrian roots, I have certainly inherited quite a type A personality, and as well, most of us, if not all of us, have grown up in a type A culture. And so I think, when I first came to practice, I came in with that mindset, that I was, as I was trained to, it wasn't even a conscious mindset, to use the will to try to achieve, whether it was a posture or a pranayama technique, or moments of mindfulness in the form of meditation. And it took a while, first to even intellectually understand that there was another way to do things. And then it took a lot more time to begin to rewire the brain, to actually do that on a cellular level, and find a more balanced approach to practice. So that was kind of the first major mental challenge. And physically, I came, as I came into yoga as a result of athletic related injuries, and through therapy. And so yeah, the pain was intense. It was really intense, and that's what got me into the mindfulness practices, because I just needed a way to deal with the pain that I was experiencing as a result of beginning to shift and heal deeply scarred and injured connective tissue. And those are challenges, that are still, present from time to time, and I think they always will be, especially as this body continues to age, at least the physical stuff. But yeah, those were kind of the two main hurdles. I won't say that I've completely cleared, but that showed up on the path when I began.
I like one thing that you mentioned of how you got something and then it took a while for it to be in your cells. And that distinction of, and then we play with this at the studio too, the difference between kind of getting it in your head, and then actually getting it in your bones, kind of embodying it, so to speak. Do you see in the, let's call it the mindfulness world, how that can show up of reading a whole bunch of books and thinking you've done the meditation instead of actually sitting and being deep within the bones of the body, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's massive difference between, understanding something on an intellectual level and understanding it, on a neurocellular level, and both really important. And it's usually for most people that it's through the intellect that we begin that process. But from the perspective especially of the two traditions in which I teach and practice and study the most, and that's classical yoga and the Buddhist tradition, these are experiential based paths. And although study of ancient scriptures is helpful, it can't take us to where we are intending to go from the perspective of these traditional practices, and that's the emancipation from suffering. They can point us in that direction, but it's up to us to tread the path day in and day out, and put in those hours and put in that effort to get there. So yeah, and as one of my teachers in the Buddhist tradition says, or said, Ajahn Chah, the Thai forest master, in some of his teachings from the Thai jungle back in the 70s, he used to say, throw all the books away, put them in a closet and lock them away, and just spend time reading the heart. And if you spend your time reading the heart, you'll begin to see all these teachings. So, that's Ajahn Chah. For me personally, I like to find a little bit of a balance and integration of using the books and intellectual study, and not just to help me get there, but also, for me, maybe a little bit less so in my older age, but I'm a born skeptic. And so for me, a huge part of my path has been, reading this stuff and then diving in deeply to the practice and testing it. And that's what I'm always trying to do with my practice, and encouraging students as well. Don't believe what I'm saying, because that's not going to get you anywhere. Try not to believe what I'm saying just because it might not be what the ego wants to hear, but apply it to your practice and see if it's true for you. And I'm always looking for loopholes, in the philosophies and the sciences of the spirit that I'm studying, and that's what I find, exciting.
Yeah, I can see a light up when you talk about kind of digging in and yeah, really putting it to test. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. It's like a healthy and open skepticism. So you're not falling into belief right away, and you're not also completely pushing it away and doubting it, but yeah, take it for a swim and test it out. And yeah,
totally. And I think ultimately, what I hope that students get from practicing and studying with me is, the ability to critically think. I think that's what this is all about. And because I'm not going to sit here and say that, Buddhist science is 100% truth, or classical yogic philosophy is 100% truth. Otherwise, I wouldn't be studying, two technically diametrically opposed traditions. And so, yeah, the more critical thinkers we have and the more people we have questioning things, the faster we push the envelope of evolution in terms of consciousness. And that's what I think this is all about.
So for those who haven't really sat and got a good experience of meditation, maybe you've read about it, got a little of that cognitive, I kind of think I know what it is. What is there any misconceptions of what meditation is, or how it is supposed to be, that you come up against when you're teaching your workshop?
Well, in terms of misconceptions, I think a lot of the perspectives of meditation being a highly esoteric practice are starting to dissipate a lot in the West. But one of the classic ones that I hear is, I can't meditate because I've got this monkey mind, and that always makes me laugh. And coming back to where we started this conversation, and my background in primatology, and from my perspective, the way I look at it is I'm still a primatologist. I'm just, I used to study black howler monkeys in the jungles of Belize, and now I study the great ape Homo sapien in the form of my own embodiment. So, the whole idea that I can't meditate because I have this monkey mind, that's, from the way that I share the teachings, that's what it's all about, is we're developing the ability to objectively observe and conduct field research on our own primate embodiment. And so that's what it's all about. And then, I guess the other one that I kind of hear is the idea of enlightenment and kind of being this unattainable state in this faraway place. But at least from the Buddhist perspective, the term nibbana and the Sanskrit equivalent nirvana, all this term means is the process of cooling. So, for example, you mentioned you were gathering your coffee. I don't know if you finished it, but of course, from the moment you poured your coffee was gradually entering deeper and deeper states of nibbana. It was beginning to cool. And so the way in which that, the suffering that we experience is often described in the Buddhist tradition is that it's the fires of the mind. Anything that creates heat and agitates the mind is this dukkha and this suffering. And really, enlightenment is just, or nibbana is just the cooling of those fires. So, nibbana is definitely something that is achievable, I believe, given the proper circumstances for any human being to attain. Now, certain people won't be exposed to the teachings or won't have, based on social circumstances, the opportunity to commit to that type of path. But it's not a faraway place, and it's something that, not only is it not far away, it's, as cliche as it sounds, it's right beneath our nose. It's right within us. It's nowhere else. It's not in India, and although I love to go spend time in the monasteries of Southeast Asia, it's not there either. It's wherever we are.
And those fires are how I experience them too, is they're constantly in motion, where sometimes the fire is raging and then it settles down, and sometimes I have a little bit of an influence over, and sometimes it's just kind of surrendering to what's happening that day. So is there times in your life, and I even catch myself doing this sometimes, where I have my teachers, and for some reason I think you've got it all figured out and your fires are fully cooled and all this, and of course I know, I'm like, oh man, what craziness is that? But yeah, where those fires you speak about, when do you experience those fires as, quite like a quite hot bonfire or some lava or something, and then when do you notice when they begin to settle down and get quite cool?
Yeah, I mean, the fires are constantly smoldering, and truly, referred to in the Buddhist tradition as the anusaya. They're, the latent tendencies within the mind, and given the right circumstances and conditions, maybe not the preferred circumstances, but certain conditions will simply, take that smoldering fire and ignite it into an inferno. So the potential is always there, but they really, they become a raging inferno simply because my own mind adds fuel to the fire. And so, that comes back to earlier in our discussion, this ability to objectively observe, the fires of anger and jealousy and hatred and fear. They're part and parcel of the human embodiment, and it doesn't matter how much practice we will be visited by these states continuously throughout our lives, but they only become a real problem when we become aversive to them, and in other words, when we attach to them, and then we empower these mind states to be much more influential than they actually are. So, that's what this practice is teaching us, is, if we can have metta for the anger, and metta for the fear, instead of trying to get rid of it, what we'll begin to see, as you alluded to, is that these states come and go, and this is kind of the central tenet of the Buddhist teachings. It said that anything that doesn't contain the teachings of impermanence, of anicca, are not the teachings of the Buddha. And so when we give these these latent tendencies room to breathe, they get gradually burn out themselves. And it doesn't mean that they don't come back. They can return seconds later. But we begin to see, through what's often referred to as the continuity concept, this perception or misperception of the mind, that this is a sure thing, that this is a solid state, whether it be an emotion or another sensory phenomena. And gradually we begin to just allow things and conditions really to take their course.
The picture I got is almost seeing myself with a whole bunch of logs, throwing them on the fire and some gasoline, and making making the fire a lot bigger than what it needs to be. Yeah. And with
certainly. And just you saying that, coming back to your earlier question about the challenges on the path, that's certainly one of them. Is we begin to see, as we develop the ability to more objectively observe how the mind behaves, one of the hardest things is we begin to see that the suffering we're experiencing in large part invariably is a result of what the mind is doing to itself. And that can be a tough pill to swallow, when we can no longer point the finger at others and blame others for what's happening within our life. And so it takes a lot of courage, to look at that stuff and recognize, okay, you know what? The vast majority of the time, if not always, my suffering is a result of what the mind is doing to itself. But then on the flip side of that, that's extremely empowering, because now we can change things. We don't have to rely on anyone else or external sources. We have all the ability to change the course of events. So,
yeah, well, that sounds lovely. Lovely, but also challenging and very illuminating. And yeah. So if you were to give us some, let's call it some bite-sized meditations, some little practices or invitations or little challenges for people to do, for maybe a little challenge to sit or to notice themselves in those moments when the fires are raging, and to notice dumping on a little more gasoline, what would those little kind of bite-sized challenges be?
Yeah. I do believe it's possible, for a brief moment, a very brief moment, to use the will, in other words, the willpower of the mind, to objectively observe. And that's how I started with these teachings, with regard to the perspective of classical yoga, and this cultivation of witness consciousness. I remember still, I was living in Victoria at the time, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go out today, and I am going to be the witness. And it was difficult, but it is doable for a brief period of time, to be able to use the will to objectively observe these states as they arise. But that is a very temporary experience, and that's where practice comes in. And ultimately, what we're doing is cultivating that objective state to last longer, a more consistent experience to objectively observe and witness things. So, I would say try that. And then the beauty of that is if we can witness objectively for a few moments, we can see that there's an aspect of the mind that can watch itself. And then when we notice that disappears rather quickly, we can also have the insight that, okay, this is going to require work for that to be a more consistent state. And this is where the practice comes in. And then in terms of, a more formal meditation, as I'm working with students online right now, and beginning the practice is to begin just with very, very short, bite-sized meditations. We seem to have these minds that are conditioned to, want to master whatever task we are learning for the first time. And, I send out a questionnaire, for example, for my online meditation course, and ask people how much time they realistically believe they have to sit on a daily basis. And, it's kind of a cruel question because the way in which the responses come in, it appears to me that, the would-be students are wanting to let me know that they have, most of the answers are upwards of like 30 minutes to an hour a day to meditate. And it's admirable, but it's highly unrealistic, especially if we're relatively new to meditation. My first meditation teacher instructed me to begin with 3 minutes a day. And, I thought that was kind of a weak approach when I first received those instructions, but it was harder than I thought to maintain that on a daily basis. And, now almost a decade and a half later of meditation, I know that if it wasn't for beginning in that way with that slow, balanced approach, I probably wouldn't still be meditating at this point. So yeah, beginning small, there's no rush, and patience is everything on this path.
Right. It's because I guess it is that same mind that is the one crafting the how much I should be doing, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Cool. Well, thank you for this. We got to dive in all over and get a little taste of you and some of the wisdom. So it's so good to have you and to have you sharing. And we'll check out in a moment. I'll give everyone your website and how to see what you're up to with your online meditations and the workshops, hopefully upcoming in the future. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of leave the students or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is obviously a exceptional time for humanity, and this is the time for the practice. This is why we practice, and it really is a wonderful opportunity to see relatively easily the ancient wisdom of all these liberation-seeking traditions of India. Often when things are going normally, let's say, it can be difficult to truly perceive what the Buddha is teaching, what Patanjali is teaching. But these ancient teachings are blatant right now with what's going on, and it's a wonderful opportunity to begin a practice, or to reignite a practice and go more deeply into it. So a lot of practitioners practice when things are going well, and then when things don't go well, that's when they drop off the practice. But to reference Ajahn Chah once again, as he put it, practice when you want to, but more importantly, practice when you don't want to. So these are challenging times, but have faith in your practice. That's what it's there for. And I assure that it will help support you, and we'll get through this together. We were talking about impermanence. All things are temporary. This too shall pass. We don't know when it will pass, but it will pass. So I wish everyone the best. Stay safe. I miss Canada very much. So I send all my love from Spain, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon.
Oh, thanks, my man. And then give us your website and what you're up to, and I'll get you all linked up and stuff, and we'll let you go.
Yeah, well, like yourself, moving things online. So my website is just myname.com, whithornsberger.com. And I'm offering an online meditation course right now. So you can check that out. And if you're interested, you can apply to join, and maybe we'll see you online there, or up in Powell River, or somewhere down the line, I'm sure.
Cool. All right. Thank you, my man. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it, man.